Boa tarde aí, todas e todos. Sejam muito bem-vindas e bem-vindos. A questão técnica importante aqui também, vou colocar no chat, tá? Vocês podem ouvir as falas tanto em português, em inglês. É só clicar aí no círculo central, que tem a imagem aí do mundo, escolher ouvir a tradução simultânea, ou assistir também a tradução em Libras. Eu vou colocar isso no chat agora. Vocês vão ouvir a voz original no fundo, que faz parte da ferramenta, né, e ajuda também aí a acompanhar a nossa apresentação, tá? Estamos muito felizes aqui com mais esse evento, em celebração aos 10 anos do nosso programa de pós-graduação em Mídia e Cotidiano da Universidade Federal Fluminense. Esse evento compõe o ciclo, né, em celebração aos 10 anos do programa, ciclo de palestras, 10 propostas para o próximo decênio. O ano de 2022 marcou os 10 anos de aprovação do programa pela CAPES. Em 2023, agora, a gente está celebrando 10 anos da nossa primeira turma de mestrado, né? Inclusive, ano passado, a gente começou a formar os nossos primeiros alunos da primeira turma de doutorado também, que começou em 2019. Então, durante esses 2 anos, aí 2022, 2023, o PPGMC UF, né, estamos realizando 10 grandes encontros para marcar essa efeméride e, inspirados por Ítalo Calvino, reunimos 10 propostas de debates, né, epistemológicos, teóricos, metodológicos, que apresentam esse momento de consolidação do nosso campo de estudos. E os 10 encontros aí são constituídos por autores que são referências nacionais e internacionais dos estudos em mídia cotidiano, que fazem parte da construção do nosso campo e da nossa história. Esse é o nosso nono encontro e temos aqui uma convidada internacional ilustre para nos acompanhar aqui hoje, a cientista política norte-americana, professora, pesquisadora, Jodi Dean, que muito gentilmente aceitou o nosso convite para estar aqui hoje, nesse nosso evento com transmissão via Zoom. Né? Obrigado aí novamente a camarada Jodi Dean. Estou aqui também com o nosso estudante de mestrado, André Cavallo, que vai me ajudar aqui na mediação e organização das perguntas para o momento do debate. Obrigado também pelo apoio, André. Quero agradecer também à FAPERJ, cujo apoio do edital permitiu a realização das palestras internacionais, os tradutores, as intérpretes de Libras que estão aqui com a gente hoje. Valeu pela parceria novamente também, gente. Vou colocar novamente aqui no chat a questão aí da possibilidade de vocês assistirem a palestra tanto em inglês como em português, como assistir também aqui a tradução em Libras, tá? Uma breve apresentação da nossa convidada também, que propôs para a gente aí o instigante tema do capitalismo comunicativo ao neofeudalismo, né? Assim, o tema do conceito de capitalismo comunicativo, né? Venho trabalhando bastante também nas minhas pesquisas, né? No meu projeto de pesquisa sobre hegemonia em contexto de plataformização, né? Assim, sou fã do trabalho da Jodi Dean, estava conversando isso com ela aqui um pouco antes, né, e bastante feliz aqui, né, e ansioso para ouvir um pouco sobre esse tema que ela está propondo para a gente. Jodi Dean é professora de teoria política, feminista e de mídia em Nova York, onde também está engajada em trabalho político de base. Criada no Mississippi, no Alabama, ela se formou na Universidade Princeton, obteve título de mestrado e doutorado em Columbia. Seus livros abordam temas como solidariedade, condições de possibilidade para a democracia, capitalismo comunicativo, necessidade de construir uma política que tenha o comunismo como horizonte, né, perspectivas aqui que partilhamos, né, digo isso aqui de mim, do André, que é o estudante aqui de mestrado que eu oriento, que eu convidei aqui para fazer essa mediação comigo, depois ajudar aqui nas perguntas. Jodi tem uma intensa publicação, né, muitos livros, artigos publicados. Recentemente, a editora Boitempo aqui no Brasil publicou em português 2 livros, né, Camarada, um ensaio sobre pertencimento político, e Multidões e Partido. Eu vou Bem-vinda, Jodi Dean. Eu vou agora projetar aqui a sua apresentação e aí você pode iniciar. Deixa eu... Creio que todos devem estar vendo bem. Quando
Awesome.
você quiser que eu passe a tela, só me dizer, tá?
Okay, great. Thank you so much for inviting me to be part of your anniversary celebration, and for letting me talk with you this afternoon. And thanks for, there have been a couple of technical issues, and I really appreciate everybody's patience with my issues with the PowerPoint. So you can go ahead and go to the next slide. Yeah, can you push the change button for the slide?
Eu creio que eu vou ter que sair aqui para passar. Se eu voltar aqui, eu creio que eu vou ter que... Eu não vou conseguir deixar... Pronto, tem que ficar assim. Pode seguir.
Yeah, that was the weird problem I had too. So he can, I mean, I think however he does it, this will be fine. We can just go like that. I'll just go ahead and start, and then if people see it this way, it won't be a problem. Okay, is that cool? Can I go ahead?
Não, não sei, eu consigo mudar do slide, sim. Eu só não estava conseguindo com a tela cheia. Dessa maneira aqui eu consigo passar os slides, sim. Tá?
Yeah, that's great. That's fine. All right. So we see this picture of this guy up there with this virtual reality glove. That's Jaron Lanier. And he identifies as the father of virtual reality. In 2010, in his book, You Are Not a Gadget, Jaron Lanier discussed newly emergent cloud computing using the language of lords and peasants. So in 2010, 14 years ago, in Lanier's account, the lords are those who control platforms and data. The peasants or serfs are the rest of us who have become dependent on platforms. Someone else owns the tools that we need to do our work. Someone else, the platform lord, is the conduit or means through which we access the market. Someone else stores our data, charges us a fee to access it, and collects metadata about our transactions and use. So this is all in Lanier's account in 2010. Now, he couldn't trace out every detail about platformization, but he identified the basic structure and dynamics right from the start. Under capitalism, the so-called sharing economy was always going to be about someone else making money. Now, over the next years, right, like following Lanier's ideas in 2010, the link between information technology and social property relations reminiscent of feudalism solidified, right? It became clearer that what was going on was starting to look feudal. And maybe you can try to click it to the next slide, so that it appears where Lanier's appearing. So about a few years after Lanier, Bruce Schneider, who's a network security expert, he talked more about this connection with feudalism. He was writing in the Harvard Business Review, and he concluded a list where he was describing all of the bad things that Facebook and Google, Apple, Microsoft, Twitter, and LinkedIn do by describing the shift of power to IT, the shift of power to internet, to information technology. IT's dramatic increase in power, Schneider said, was indicative of digital feudalism. Schneider warned, if you've started to think of yourself as a hapless peasant in a Game of Thrones power struggle, you're more right than you realize. These are not traditional companies, and we are not traditional customers. These are feudal lords, and we are their vassals, peasants, and serfs. More recently, Yanis Varoufakis, the economist and former Greek finance minister, he had published a book about techno-feudalism, saying that techno-feudalism is taking over. Capitalism is dead. Next slide. Now, although the techno-feudal thesis is rejected by critics like Yevgeny Morozov, and who actually initially liked the techno-feudal hypothesis. So even though it's the techno-feudal hypothesis has been rejected, but it's sometimes there's a debate around it. It seems like now more and more people kind of accept as a reflex the idea that most of us are dependent vassals under the dominion of big technology, right? That doesn't seem like a very dramatic thing to say. Tech billionaires increased their wealth by over $360 billion in the first year of the pandemic, right? As a time, as everyone recalls, millions of workers all over the world lost their jobs, or they were forced to stay in their jobs and risk their health, their lives, and the health and lives of their families. So the extreme inequality associated with technology is well known, right? So even though like linear might have been kind of groundbreaking in 2010, at this point, it's pretty well known that we are, everybody uses this language of tech lords. So it seems like not surprising to say it. What is surprising, though, is how different this reality or this timeline is from the view of networked digital communications 25 to 35 years ago. And maybe you can go through just sort of click the slides, like a few more through, like 1, 2, 3, 4 to kind of go along with this. Good, maybe go one more. Let's see, good. One more. And can you go one more? And then one more, please. And then one more after that. Great. So what I want to try to bring out right now is how strange it is that we're in this era where tech lords make sense as a metaphor, because like 30 years ago, nobody thought that way. In fact, in the early 1990s, and even in the early 2000s, the internet was associated with democracy, citizen journalism, town halls for millions, transparency in government, and the opportunity for everyday people to make their voices heard was going to usher in a golden age of political participation. Anyone with a laptop or cell phone would be able to get their message out without having to go through the censors, judgments, and hierarchies of gatekeeping institutions. Information would be free. Entrenched power structures would crumble. The chains of tyranny would be lost. So a primary buzzword in the late 90s, early 2000s, a primary buzzword for this democratic fantasy was participatory. Participatory was attached as a prefix to all sorts of things, and it was heralding a revolutionary change that in social relations that the internet was supposed to be bringing about. Participatory media, participatory budgeting, participatory art, and so on. Next slide, please. In the 90s, the internet was associated with friction-free capitalism, a smooth world of flows. Observers as far apart as the neoliberal New York Times columnist Thomas Friedman, he has this famous book where he says the world is flat. So observers like Thomas Friedman, all the way to communists like Michael Hart and Antonio Negri, they all shared the same technological imaginary of global horizontal productivity. Networked communications were to enable a new economy of abundance rather than scarcity. The productivity and creativity of the multitude would exceed and rupture state control. So could you forward to 2 more slides, please? An oft-repeated slogan announced, "Information wants to be free." Now, one of the questions, and you can go one more slide. One of the questions was, well, did this mean free as in unrestricted, or free as in no one has to pay for it? And if it meant free as in no one has to pay for it, then how are content creators going to eat? The blurring or instability around everything being free on the internet was indicative of the larger, more fundamental equating of democracy and capitalism that the defeat of the USSR seemed to cement. The same infrastructure that let some people get rich in the dot-com bubble and supported terms like killer apps and the whole big data rush in the 2000s. This was supposed to make everybody freer, right? It was this merging of the ideologies of democracy and capitalism. And the even better part was supposed to be that it was all going to be fun, right? Network personalized media turned work into play and users into producers. And new media scholars would use this language like playbur instead of like play or labor, like the merging of play and labor in playbur, or the prosumer, which is like the consumer as producer, really meant, it was supposed to be all like super creative, but what it really meant was producing for capital without being paid. Or another way to put it is this sort of excited, extravagant labor of prosumer or a consumer as producer also meant that capital had figured out how to extract value from processes of private consumption and use. At any rate, my point is that in the 90s, and even after the dot-com bubble burst and we got into the 2000s Web 2.0, communication technologies at the turn of the millennium made capitalism acceptable, exciting, and cool, immunizing it from critique by rendering critics into outmoded technophobes. So can you pass through several more slides, please? So it's not, I just want them to go through. It's not following one by one with what I'm speaking. It's just supposed to flow through as the background. So if he goes to number 11. So 30 years ago, the promise of the internet was more democracy, abundance, and freedom. That fantasy unleashed a set of dynamics that intensified inequality, undermined the shared understandings necessary for democracy, and enabled the rise of the far right all around the world. So instead of an era of communicative capitalism, of communicative action in a democratic public sphere, which is to use the language of Jürgen Habermas, expansions in networked personal communications entrapped us in communicative capitalism. So instead of like Habermasian communicative action, we got communicative capitalism, an era where communication merges with capitalism, where communication is central to the production, where communication is central to production, distribution, circulation, and accumulation. Can you go to number 12, please? Slide 12, please. So I want to just go through this list to give us a sense of the depth and breadth of the merger of capitalism and communication, right? Like how far this goes. So I'll just read these through. So we see this merger of capitalism and communication in, first, the complex logistics that supported trade system built on the concentration of industrial production in special economic zones. Two, in the automation and informatization of productive processes that standardize and accelerate production while decreasing the need for human labor power. Three, in the heights, we see this merger of capitalism and communication in the injunction to individuate and the corresponding overburdening of the individual form as ever more choices and responsibilities are downloaded onto individuals via personalized networked communication devices. Five, we see the merger in the new capacity for capital to monitor and capture the activities through which we reproduce our social lives. Six, in platformatization, or the rise of platforms, the use of which generates data and income for platform owners. Seven, the intensification and spread of surveillance. And then we can go to the next slide. Oh wait, no, I think my list and slides are not all together, but I'm not going to read all of them, but we can see these go, we have all the way to 9 different elements that point to this merger of communication and capitalism. So all of these are not, just to say that it merges communication and capitalism is not enough. It means that we need to recognize how information and communication are coterminous with systems of extraction, as well as systems of production and distribution. The tech giants are growing ever richer and more predatory, their founders becoming billionaires because of the cheap labor of their workers, the outsourcing of work to third-party contractors, the free labor of users, the tax breaks bestowed on these big corporations by cities desperate to attract jobs, and the solidification of their monopolies. So the merger of communication and capitalism needs to be really understood in light of all of the awful parts of capitalism, particularly these extractive, pervasive, intrusive, and unavoidable dimensions. The tech giants have become masters of the entire process of social life. So slide 14 first. Next, slide 14 next. And so, it could be an exaggeration to say that the present is literally an era of peasants and lords, although Elon Musk actually calls Twitter users peasants. So it might be a little bit of an exaggeration to say this is an era of peasants and lords, but it's right to say that the contemporary era is characterized as an intensification of inequality, with more billionaires, a greater distance between rich and poor, and the solidification of a differentiated legal architecture that protects corporations and the rich, while it immiserates and incarcerates the working and lower class. Slide 15, please. The promise we were sold back in the 90s was that networks would lead to a horizontal society, a flat world of interconnections and equal possibility. But as Albert Laszlo Barabasi's research on complex networks demonstrates, free choice, growth, and preferential attachment, which are the characteristics of complex networks. So free choice, growth, and preferential attachments, these actually produce extremes of inequality. Next slide, slide 16, please. So I want to talk a little bit about Barabasi's account of node distribution in complex networks. That's slide 16. In complex networks, again, networks characterized by free choice, growth, and preferential attachment. In complex networks, people voluntarily make choices, right? It's a free choice. And under these circumstances, the number of links per item or hits per site grows over time. So that's the sort of the free choice and growth. But then there's preferential attachment. When the reason these things grow over time is that people like them because others like them. So people are more likely to like something as soon as they see that someone else has liked it. Something is more desirable, more appealing because others like it. So in complex networks, link distribution or node distribution follows a power law distribution where the one that is most popular, generally speaking, so you can see this in the power law distribution site, the one that's most popular generally has twice as many hits or links as the second most popular, which has twice as many as the third most popular, and so on until you get to the long tail of the distribution curve. So the one at the top has significantly more than the ones or many at the bottom. This is the winner takes all or winner takes most effect or distribution pattern that we see in the contemporary economy, right? It's a distribution that's not a bell curve, it's a long tail. A few billionaires and a billion precarious workers. Go to the next slide, please, slide 17. So this power law distribution fits for anything that is characterized by free choice, growth, and preferential attachment. So you can see this, let's say, in academic influence or the readership of academic articles. It's usually going to be the case that there's one that everybody has to cite, a couple that most people cite, and then like zillions and billions written that nobody ever cites and will never ever read, right? So it's free choice. Like people are not forced to all read the same people, but because others are reading them, we have to. And then all the way down to all of the zillions of articles that nobody will ever read. That's the long tail. Complex networks, and we see this following this distribution of family wages. So complex networks, like we have, in the internet and in contemporary capitalism, complex networks encourage inclusion. The more items in a network, the larger the rewards for those at the top. Growth is a characteristic, then, as well as an aim. Complex networks induce competition for attention, resources, money, and jobs for anything that's given a networked form. Complex networks also lead to concentration, right? That's the top of the power law distribution. Hubs, monopolies, blockbusters, influencers. So the result of just the structure, just the formal structure of complex networks is hierarchy. Right? The power law distributions where those at the top have much, much more than those at the bottom. Hierarchy is a feature then of network society. It's not a bug. It's not an accident. It's a feature. It's built in. The basic logic produces lords and peasants, the one and the many. Now, it's often overlooked by tech writers, but these same neo-feudalizing tendencies of communicative capitalism also show up in the servant economy, right? And I don't mean, when I'm now turning to the servant economy, I don't mean the replacement of jobs by automation, but the opposite, right? The limits of automation. Jason E. Smith draws out Marx's analysis of the connection between industrialization and the expansion of services. As productivity increases, requiring fewer workers, those in need of a wage to survive are thrown into sectors less amenable to automation, right? They're thrown into services. Services are less amenable to automation, in part because of the specific skills that care work requires. Diapering a baby, moving an elderly person from a bed. This kind of work also resists automation because the jobs are cheap. They're the last jobs available to those thrown out of every other. And as Marx writes in Capital and is quoted there on the screen, The extraordinary increase in the productivity of large-scale industry, accompanied as it is by a more intensive and a more extensive exploitation of labor power in all other spheres of production, permits a larger and larger part of the working class to be employed unproductively. Hence, it is possible to reproduce the ancient domestic slaves on a constantly expanding scale under the name of a servant class. Capitalist industry itself reproduces social property relations characteristic of earlier economic forms. My argument then is that society is no longer oriented toward the production of workers and commodities. It is now an order of personalized service, privilege, hierarchy, and fealty, not a social factory, but a social manner. More and more of the people forced to sell their labor power to survive sell this labor as services to those looking for deliveries, drivers, cleaners, trainers, home health aides, nannies, guards, coaches, and so on. The buying and selling of services is enabled by new intermediaries, technological platforms whose owners insert themselves between service offers and seekers, being sure to exact a fee along with the data and metadata that accompany the transaction. Our basic interactions are not our own. With advances in production seemingly at a dead end, capital today is hoarded and wielded as a weapon of disruption. Its wielders, new lords, the rest of us, dependent, proletarianized servants and serfs. So you can look at slide 19 and then slide 20. And yeah. Now, there's always been widespread land hoarding on the part of the super rich. And so when I'm talking about neo-feudalism, I'm not saying that the primary mode of surplus extraction today is a landed aristocracy sitting on a peasant class bound to the land. Neo-feudalism is not a simple return of the feudal form of exploitation. Go to slide 21, please. In fact, in the so-called advanced economies, the majority of people do not have direct access to their means of reproduction. They require some kind of income that will enable them to purchase what they need to subsist: food, shelter, and means of life. Neo-feudal serfs are proletarianized serfs, free from the land, free from job security, free from social welfare safety nets, and dependent on markets for every aspect of their lives. Networked telecommunications have enabled the insertion of a new appropriating class at precisely this point: access to markets. Can you go to slide 21? This is what platforms like Google, Facebook, Amazon, Apple's App Store, Uber, and Airbnb provide: digital infrastructures that enable two or more groups to interact. Platforms position themselves between buyers and sellers, seekers and suppliers, mediating interactions while collecting fees and data. Even more, their monopoly power and enormous infrastructures produce ecosystems that shape economic life in ways impossible to escape. Even though technology companies employ a relatively small percentage of the workforce, their effects are tremendous, essentially remaking entire industries around the acquisition, mining, and deployment of data. In fact, it's because of the smaller workforces that data tech is indicative of a tendency to neo-feudalism. Capital accumulation occurs less through commodity production and wage labor than through services, rents, licenses, fees, work done for free, and data treated as a natural resource. Those who work for a wage are subjected to ever worsening conditions as algorithmic scheduling and surveillance tech press them to work harder and faster with fewer breaks and fewer benefits. For workers in Amazon warehouses, in call centers, and in fast food, work is degrading, soul-sucking, abusive, and literally dehumanizing. That people tire, that they need to use the toilet, that they can't always work to full capacity, and that they have lives isn't part of the equation. Let's scroll down to in the slides, please. Can you go to 24, please? And then go to 25, please. Go to 26, please. And let's just go to 27. Great. Thank you. Crucial to the power of platforms is the way they constitute grounds for user activities. Platforms are the conditions of possibility for interactions to occur. Google makes it possible to find information in an impossibly dense and changing information environment. Amazon lets us easily locate items, compare prices, and purchase consumer goods from established as well as unknown vendors. Uber enables strangers to share rides. Airbnb does the same for houses and apartments. One's car isn't for personal transport, it's for making money. One's apartment isn't a place to live, it's something to rent out. Personal property becomes an instrument for the capital and data accumulation of the lords of the platform. And the more people use these platforms, the less we can avoid them. They become more effective, more powerful, ultimately transforming the larger environment of which they are a part. I'm going to use just one example. And I live in a small town in upstate New York, and it's a kind of old town with old buildings, and people have been buying them and renting them out as Airbnbs, but that's made then the prices go up and then the taxes go up so that people who actually live there can't afford to live there anymore unless they turn their own houses into Airbnbs. So it's like, even if people don't want to rent out their rooms or rent out their houses, the pressure that comes about as an effect of other people doing it is so great that it's like people have almost no other choice. Instead of rearranging production processes and implementing technological improvements to increase productivity, which is how Marx described real subsumption, capital accumulation today increasingly takes place under conditions of formal subsumption. Non-capitalist processes produce value that capital, whether via measures of finance or governance, simply takes. Antonio Negri associates the resurgence or non-weakening of formal subsumption with producers' reappropriation of fixed capital in ways that let them autonomously experiment with organizing production in common, right? So Negri always has a sort of optimistic view. More compelling examples of resurgent formal subsumption are Uber and Airbnb, because neither create new efficiencies in the provision of local transportation or in lodging for travelers. Both rely on the fixed capital of earners rather than on capitalists who invest in means of production. Both turn assets acquired out of workers' consumption funds, their cars and houses, into means for the capital accumulation of another, the corporation. Amazon, and let's go to the next slide, please. Amazon further illustrates the primacy of monopoly predation and control that's indicative of communicative capitalism's neo-feudalizing tendency. So we can see an even better example of how communicative capitalism is neo-feudalizing by looking more specifically at Amazon. Stacy Mitchell has a nice detailed research analysis that's I'm drawing on here. She describes Amazon as a toll road. Amazon extracts enormous fees from the merchants wanting to sell goods in its marketplace. These include the fee to sell on the site, which is called a referral fee, and two optional fees, advertising and fulfillment. But because of Amazon's practice of prioritizing sponsored ads in search results, sellers feel compelled to buy additional advertising, right, rather than just relying on recommendations, right? So this becomes this extra fee, like it's not worth it to them unless they pay for this extra advertising, which now is operating like another fee. Additionally, many sellers rely on Amazon for warehousing and shipping. The service is called Fulfillment by Amazon. And again, this is because the algorithms prioritize those sellers who use Fulfillment by Amazon in search results. So selling on other sites is like barely even an option. Not only does Amazon's domination of the online sales market render other sales outlets less viable and harder to find, but sellers can't lower their prices on the other platforms, or on the other outlets. And the reason that they can't lower their prices and just say be done with Amazon is that Amazon's so-called competitive pricing rules demote items in search results that are present on other sites. Right? They eliminate the buy now button from the search results, and they add an alert that tells customers like, oh, it might be priced lower someplace else or might be priced higher here, again, disadvantaging sellers who are who want to try to avoid fees on Amazon. Amazon's aggressive fee structure enables even more additional predatory practices. So the company loses billions on the free shipping promised by its Prime subscription service. But because this Prime subscription service is so popular, it lets Amazon dominate in online sales. So once people have bought into Prime, they have a strong incentive to keep shopping on Amazon. So the enormous sums that seller fees generate more than makes up for the losses in this other feature, Prime. In fact, the fees for advertising, warehousing, and shipping ended up paying for Amazon's enormous logistic buildup. So the sellers, the folks in its marketplace, actually ended up paying for Amazon's logistical infrastructure, right? They built an infrastructure that they were then, that they didn't have a choice to build. They built the infrastructure that then further entrapped them, and that they had no choice but to use. Amazon's fees and tolls combine with the rent-driven accumulation strategy of Amazon Web Services. Together with Azure, which is owned by Microsoft, and GCP, which is owned by Google, Amazon Web Services is a cloud platform. On this platform, users are charged for processing, which is called compute. They're charged for networking, which is input and output, and they're charged for storage. So instead of building up their own technological infrastructures, firms purchase computing services from larger companies like Amazon, Google, Microsoft. And the big three then ends up controlling like more than half the market, like 65% of the market for these compute services is controlled by the big three. If a smaller competitor comes in and starts to pose a risk, all that the big three has to do is they just buy them. Functioning like public utilities in that they provide essential services too expensive for most firms to supply for themselves, the structural dominance of these big tech companies enables them to act in predatory and unaccountable ways. With the development of machine learning and generative AI, right, generative artificial intelligence, the power symmetries are insurmountably immense. Developing and training deep learning applications requires enormous data sets and amounts of compute time. Only a few companies are in a position to provide, much less afford the necessary data sets, the data sets of sufficient size to train the generative AI models. OpenAI, which is a company, and it's the company that developed and released the groundbreaking AI ChatGPT. OpenAI uses Azure, which is Microsoft, and Microsoft invested over $10 billion in the company, acquiring a 49% share. So to kind of zoom back out for the neo-feudalized, to make explicit the neo-feudalizing tendencies here, in this, lordship would designate a social relation for the appropriation of surplus. And this is the relation that we are in with big tech. The theme of peasants and lords of the internet, noted by Lanier, has escalated to become a common sense as the tech giants have become richer and more extractive, because their structural dominance enables them to extract increasingly unavoidable tolls, fees, and rents. Neither consumers nor businesses can avoid them, and cities and states compete to attract them. The economic scale and impact of our tech overlords is greater than that of most so-called sovereign states. Like so many tributary demands, their tax breaks take money from communities. Their presence drives up rents and real estate prices, driving out affordable apartments, small businesses, and people. All right, now I'm going to sort of think about this. What I've been pointing out is this neo-feudalizing tendency of communicative capitalism. It was not inevitable. This was not the only thing that could have happened once network communications and information technology emerged. My argument is not that there's no other way to structure networks, right? You can structure social networks to counter these neo-feudalizing tendencies. For example, to counter preferential attachment, sites could simply not report how many people like something. They could not recommend things just because others like them. Sites don't have to show us how many followers a person has. Like, we could never know. Social networks choose how to rank or privilege posts. It's a matter of algorithm design. As folks probably recall, before 2009, the Facebook feed was chronological. Then around 2009, the algorithms are adjusted around popularity, and then they became individualized. These are choices of algorithm design. The platform TikTok, it takes preferential attachment to an extreme, combining several preference measures, right? Time watching, likes, and comments to determine which videos to push to whom, and to thereby create power law distributions, videos that stand out from the rest and go viral. But my important point here is that this issue of preferential attachment that is part of complex networks can be designed around. It's a matter of how the network and the algorithms are designed. Additionally, so that's the first point. Additionally, the commercialization of the internet was not inevitable. It didn't have to be a capitalist internet. The United States could have worked through the UN or with other countries to develop a fully public internet. It did not have to transfer responsibility for supervising the internet backbone from the National Science Foundation's NSFNet to private corporations, and it certainly didn't need to deregulate telecommunications in 1996. But that deregulation paved the way for the mergers and consolidations that concentrated media ownership into massive private property. Bluntly put, network communications didn't have to take the form of private property. They could have been protected as a commons or a public utility. So instead of like the dominant search engine being the creation and product of a corporation, it could have been publicly developed and funded like the internet was initially. This leads me to one last example of something that was not inevitable: the collection of data and metadata and its treatment as a natural resource available for private appropriation. Corporations could have been prevented from collecting this data, from storing it, from selling it. There could be limits on server sizes and server farms, which actually would be environmentally significant. There could be those could be disincentives from data collection. All of these, algorithm design, commercialization, data gathering, and storage, could have been and could still be different, but that's a political choice. And that requires political will to change them and political will to undertake an enormous fight. And so where's the fight? Where's the fight? If networked communications have led to the intensification of monopoly power and widespread inequality, where is the resistance? Like, yeah, we know people criticize networked media. In the US, Zuckerberg and other tech billionaires have had to testify before congressional committees, and people love to hate on them. They love to point out, particularly liberals love to criticize Instagram and TikTok. Liberals get really upset when Facebook or X, Twitter, allows the uncensored circulation of misinformation. But at best, the liberal response is to ask for more regulation. They don't demand that the tech giants be seized and turned into public utilities. And the basic reason why is obvious there. It's like all mainstream politicians accept capitalism. They don't think that in principle it's wrong for there to be billionaires and media conglomerates with the power to scrape up, mine, and sell our personal information and then to charge us for doing this. So if the neo-feudalizing effects of communicative capitalism are so bad, why aren't millions of people in the street demanding change? Why isn't there a movement for socializing the internet? Right? I mean, yeah, a few hundred people here or there, but why is there not a mass movement demanding a free and public internet? Where is the revolutionary consciousness? The answer to that has to do with the way that networked, personalized digital media impacts communication and hence consciousness. Most broadly put, our communication networks are primarily affective networks oriented to the circulation of outrage. They fragment understanding and undermine meaning, contributing to a world steered by images that resist consolidation in explanations and organizations with a capacity to endure. So now I want to shift into this thinking about why there's not a mass, million-person movement for socializing the internet. My answer is that it has to do with the impact of networked communication, of the impact of communicative capitalism on our consciousness, the impact of the merger of communication and capitalism on how we understand, how we think, and what we can think and say. So I want to focus now on three changes, and this will be as I move into the last part. So we can go to slide number 30, please. This first change involves one of these primary characteristics of communicative capitalism, and it involves the shift from message to contribution, or a shift from the use value to the exchange value of an utterance. As folks know, it's kind of a well-known idea. The basic kind of zero ground level of communication is formulated in terms of a message and response. A message is delivered to a receiver with the intention of eliciting a response, right? So message tries to elicit response from a receiver. This changes in communicative capitalism. Messages are contributions to circulating content, not actions to elicit direct responses. The exchange or circulation value of the contribution overtakes the use value of the message. Meaning or use value matters less than the likelihood that a contribution will be shared. So whether it's a lie, that doesn't matter. What matters is simply that something was said, that it was expressed, that a comment was made, that an image was liked or shared. So communication is subjected to an economic logic. It moves away from its use value to its exchange value. Slide 31, please. I'm going to give an example of this in slide 31. So here, this example is about being ratioed on Twitter. And that refers, see, that's where that yellow arrow is pointing. Being ratioed refers to the presence of a high number of comments on a tweet. Typically, a high level of comments means that there's a lot of disagreement. So what's interesting here is it's the number that registers, the aggregate. The actual content of any given comment, or even the fact that the comments say wildly different things, or could really disagree with each other, all of that's eclipsed. The only thing that matters is that, oh, a lot of people disagree with this. And then this, actually, we can even zoom out from that. And a single tweet's ratio, that a single tweet has been ratioed, this gets eclipsed by what else is trending and is usually forgotten in a matter of hours. So in social media, something that is well argued, true, and important to a matter of real concern rarely or barely registers because the stream of contributions is endless and constant. Something else that is true and important will not just appear tomorrow, but it's appearing right now at the same time in the same feed, making the same demands on our attention. As equal contributions to circuits of information and affect, then, the content of our utterances doesn't matter. It's unimportant. What matters is their mobility, their capacity to circulate. Dissent is just more content, whether or not it's cogently argued or the daily outrage. And then this makes us have to think about what's the point of critique if it can't register? Communicative capitalism undermines critique's conditions of possibility. So that's this first point about this problem of why we don't have a really great resistance to private capitalist internet, is like actually the conditions of possibility for critique have been radically undermined. And that's radically undermined in the shift from the use value to the exchange value of an utterance. Now I want to go to the second change in slide 32, the second change in the character of communication, and that involves its affective dimension. The channels through which we communicate reward number. The more hits and shares, the better. It's now clear to everyone that the circulation capacity of outrage vastly exceeds that of cogent arguments. Reaction time is shortened, responding is easier. In a setting of constant, unceasing, infinite, and ever intensifying demands on our attention, we don't have time to respond to everything, to evaluate everything, to reflect. Nuance takes too long. Science doesn't register, but intensity does, whether as outrage, absurdity, cuteness, or reassuring cliches. Right? You don't argue with a meme, you rant through a meme, hoping to impact someone long enough that they will share it. But even this will be transient, a momentary dopamine hit that won't last long and that will dissolve in the larger flow. Can we go to the next slide, please? The networks of communicative capitalism. And then you can go to the next one. The network, 34. The networks of communicative capitalism are affective Because images and emotions circulate more rapidly than ideas. It's easier to share the photo of the scared koala on the edge of a burning forest than it is to digest, summarize, and share an article about Australia's increased commitment to fossil fuel extraction. It's easier because one's decision about sharing can happen rapidly, and one can expect that others will affirm this decision with likes and shares. The repercussions of the communicative practices of affective networks are not confined to digital networks. Why did people ever think that a communicative terrain promising to include everyone and enable anyone to say anything at any time would be a good idea? Why did we think this would be a good idea? Everyone includes hucksters and trolls as much as it does female-identified artisans and sincere rural teenagers. It includes flat earthers and fascists as much as it does quantum physicists and communists, supporters of apartheid, as well as supporters of liberation. The material conditions of analog media reduce and slow down encounters between wildly divergent worldviews. Digital media bombards users with them. When it took effort to tune into the controversial radio show or locate the banned book, elites and majorities could ignore them, and subcultures could embrace them. Today, strange and unsettling takes sweep like wildfires through our communicative habitats, destroying the assumptions and practices necessary for meaning in the process. In digital communication networks, we regularly confront myriad others whose views of reality differ from our own. Our agreements are not just matters of taste and opinion. They're not even just about morality and the good life. Disagreements are about reality itself. Next slide, please. Again, these have always been there, but networked digital communication brings us into speeded up contact with them. Denialists of all stripes, influencers whose every upload tries to sell us something, an endless array of cynics and nihilists. All news is fake to somebody, and we find ourselves pressed to react to all of it right here, right now. Go to slide 37, please. The last third change in communication that affects our consciousness and our ability to generate political will is the decline of symbolic efficiency. And I get this expression from Zizek. The idea is that symbols are points of reference that signify one way in one field means something altogether different in another one. And there's no way to stabilize meaning or provide decisive determination. Next slide, please. In the US, the pandemic and the 2020 election forced us to confront this decline in symbolic efficiency. There's no big other who could tell us whether the virus was real, masks worked, whether vaccines were safe, or who won the election. And these are not just political disagreements. The political disagreements arise from the material change in communication. The collapse of the symbolic is suffocating, a kind of closure that makes significant action impossible because it can't register. In fact, the politics itself isn't clear. The pandemic and the 2020 election blurred left and right. Our setting is not one of symbolic efficiency where we can map the sides with any certainty. Can you go to slide 39, please? And then go down, please, to 41, I think. Just go to, 41. Some users have adapted to the disorienting cacophony of the decline of symbolic efficiency through careful curation of their feeds. Already in his 1995 book, Being Digital, Nicholas Negroponte predicted that networked media would enable users to pick and choose what sort of information they want to consume. He worried that this could diminish encounters with unexpected, unsearched-for stories. 30 years later, after enduring flame wars, trolls, Gamergate, bullying, gaslighting, streams of lies and hate, not to mention privacy violations and countless ads, social media users tailored their lists of friends and followers, hoping for interactions that won't amplify the low-level outrage that's become communicative capitalism's primary affect. Go to the next slide, please. Even as some call out, so slide 42, even as some call out for Facebook and Twitter to do this culling for them, right, to protect them from fake news, as if capitalist corporations should determine what the meaning of fake and news is. Many of us form groups or tribes or bubbles to have loci of common meaning and assurance. We seek out those whose interests and experiences are similar, who face the same kinds of challenges that we face, whether or not the challenges are like a complicated recipe, navigating bureaucracies, or dealing with trauma. The necessity of these affiliations is attested to by the vehemence with which they are defended, from competing fandoms to the reflex to cancel. Defending the fortress that protects who one is has become an imperative, experienced as a matter of life and death. Could you go to slide 44, please? The politically engaged also seek out allies, comrades, and fellow travelers. Some liberal analysts criticize these information silos, operating as if, go to 44, please. Operating as if the ideal of a public sphere were operative online. These liberals encourage users to seek out those with whom they disagree, to engage them, and to look for common ground. One wonders if these liberals are disingenuous, or if they've ever been online. Networked digital interactions with those outside one's bubble lack the shared understanding necessary for political discussion. Reality is not the same. Go to the next slide, please, 45. Words mean different things. Siloing, bubbles, make sense as a reaction to the absence of shared meaning in digital networks. Like-minded comrades provide necessary support against the ceaseless waves of outrage. Fragmentation, polarization is a massive adaptive response to the decline of symbolic efficiency, not an individual failing. Slide 46, please. In the affective infrastructures of communicative capitalism, there is no commonly shared meaning. With constant communication but maddening incommunicability, we lose the sense not just that no one hears us, but that even not just that someone hears us, but that even if they do, there is no way they can understand us. Meaning is individuated, what matters to me, what I have experienced, what I feel. Next slide, please, 47. Under these conditions of the decline of symbolic efficiency, disparate issues and concerns are equalized. The daily deaths of thousands circulating in the same media space as fury over a language faux pas and straight up lies. Next slide, please. Slide 48. Little registers as significant, or everything is equally significant, because signification has become so elusive. Cries for help don't register. Demands for change seem utterly inadequate, especially because someone will immediately contradict or deflect them. We get overloaded by pervasive feelings of insecurity, anxiety, and catastrophe, overloaded because there's no relief, no redress, no escape. The affective dimensions of communicative capitalism provide a habitat more conducive to neo-feudalism than to emancipatory egalitarian revolution. Fragmentation as an adaptive response to the decline of symbolic efficiency helps explain some of the challenges involved with building class consciousness today. Not only have the conditions of labor characteristic of the height of industrial unionization changed due to offshoring, automation, and the rise of services, but the shared reference points and cultural commonalities necessary for communication have ruptured. In the so-called most advanced economies in the world, the conditions of the majority of workers resemble the isolation and idiocy Marx associated with rural peasants. Idiocy born not of stupidity, but from a narrow confinement to the particular, broken only by incessantly circulating outrage. In this setting, the primary language of politics has devolved into safety and survival. Anything more seems utopian, unrealistic on a warming planet, and impossible to organize even if we could imagine it. Describing the average US American as a powerless neo-serf, Umer Huq sees a creation unique in modern history, a nominal citizen of a rich country, but one whose every imaginable possibility goes on shrinking by the day because he is impotent, castrated, every day can only feel something like either torment or death. People have good reason to feel insecure. The catastrophe of neo-feudal capitalism's expropriation of the social surplus in a setting of a grossly unequal and warming planet is real. So I'm going to conclude. Slide 49, please. Communicative capitalism is tending to neo-feudalism. The shift from message to contribution, the affective character of communicative networks, and the decline of symbolic efficiency impact the kind of people we are, the kind of consciousness we have, and the communities we can create. Communication is a material dimension of the production and reproduction of life. And now more than ever, it's base as well as superstructure. It's the infrastructure bridging and meshing base and superstructure. And I've told a super grim story, right? Like this is very, very dark. And it reminds us that the hierarchical character of complex networks supports the private accumulation of the few, not the flourishing of the many. It tells us that the problems of fake news and anti-vaxxers and all that is pushed on us as new and different are actually features baked into digitally networked communications. Like the way I like to say this to American audiences is like, the problem wasn't Trump, right? Like the fake news apparatus, the circulation of lies that was baked into communicative capitalism. He's just a symptom. He's just somebody who knew how to use it. So the problems are baked into digitally networked communication. So the line of argument that I'm making, I think, even though it's dark and dreary, methodologically, it attunes us to the limits of critique in a setting where truths and lies are communicatively equivalent. And it shows us why our politics today has to be militant and focused on building tight, disciplined, and committed political organizations, but can't rely on the kind of old school, oh, let's just circulate it in social media. Let's have a website. Let's engage in critique. No, no, no. The setting we're in won't let a politics that's purely communication sort of settle the day or win the battle. We have to have tight and militant organizations. So I hope that the tech features worked okay and that we can still have some discussion about the ideas I presented.
Boa tarde, pessoal. Eu vou apresentar as perguntas aqui agora para a professora Jodi Dean. Queria perguntar para ela se ela prefere... 3 pessoas fizeram perguntas até agora. Você prefere responder um bloco ou uma de cada vez?
André, eu quero só...
Let's have like 2 or 3 at a time. Like, people have heard me talk a lot, and if I really have to insist, okay, oh my God, I've got to answer this now, I'll just do that.
André, eu só quero pedir para, por favor, eu gostaria de iniciar com uma pergunta aqui
Ah,
e também agradecer a apresentação, a exposição da professora Jodi Dean, assim, uma alegria enorme ter você aqui com a gente, te ouvir falar, né, assim, já conhecia, já te acompanho, né, como disse, sou fã do seu trabalho, né, assim, ando usando muito, né, o conceito de capitalismo comunicativo no meu projeto de pesquisa que discute hegemonia em contexto de plataformização, né, então estava ouvindo com bastante atenção. Eu quero fazer uma pergunta aqui para iniciar, na verdade, uma questão em três momentos, assim. Primeiro que você falasse um pouco mais, assim, me parece, pela sua exposição, e o conceito, a categoria de neofeudalismo, ela está aparecendo mais como uma metáfora, né, de uma forma para se explicar, né, uma categoria para se explicar uma forma do capitalismo hoje, né, caracterizado aí por essa super exploração, né, assim, por uma excessiva, né, um excessivo monopólio, né, de pouquíssimas empresas de tecnologia que organizam, né, a produção da vida, do trabalho, da reprodução, né, do mundo, do que exatamente um retorno, ou de fato, um outro estágio societal, né, ou de evolução do trabalho, né, e da vida, como Marx pensou a evolução, por exemplo, do feudalismo, né, para o capitalismo, ali todo o processo que aconteceu, né, ali durante, né, século 17, 18. E esse é o primeiro ponto da pergunta. O segundo, assim, eu venho trabalhando muito com o conceito de engajamento, que eu considero que é chave para discutir uma série de questões hoje relacionando comunicação, tecnologia e política, né? Assim, as empresas de tecnologia passam a conceber esse conceito que tem uma origem política, né, como sinônimo de métricas, de performance, de páginas, de perfis, etc. Né? E numa proposta de uma teoria crítica, eu vou entender engajamento como um processo de vinculação social, afetiva e gustativa, né? O gosto de um sujeito por uma determinada ideologia. Né? Gramsci já mostrava muito e discutia muito essa dimensão do emocional na política, né? A paixão na política. E me parece, né, que até por essa lógica que você aponta de fusão, né, de democracia e mercado no capitalismo comunicativo, né, a direita política ou até o fascismo, né, tem conseguido se aproveitar muito mais, né, dessa lógica de circulação e essa característica de fato de funcionamento, essa forma de interação e engajamento proporcionada pelas redes. Né? Inclusive, uma coisa que eu acho muito interessante que você fala, essa ilusão de participação política, né, que faz parte do capitalismo comunicativo. Né? Afinal, a política real ela dá muito trabalho. Né? Participar de uma audiência, participar de uma assembleia, melhor dizendo, de um movimento social, de um sindicato, de um partido político, tudo isso dá muito trabalho. Né? Como que você enxerga, você está vendo no seu trabalho, essas possibilidades, né, de superação por meio de organização da classe trabalhadora, né, por fora das redes, a perspectiva de construção, porque eu acho que, inclusive, o debate deveria ir além da regulação, né, algo que está muito forte no Brasil, né, mas, de fato, criar redes de propriedade da classe trabalhadora, né, plataformas coletivas, né? E acho que tem alguns avanços nisso também. Enfim, queria que você comentasse um pouco sobre isso, sobre a categoria em si que você traz, né? E falasse um pouco mais e sobre essas alternativas aí que temos diante dessas ciladas aí colocadas, né, pelo capitalismo comunicativo, essa forma do neofeudalismo, como você bem apresenta, né? E depois eu agradecer aí o apoio do André, ele trazer aí articular um pouco as perguntas aí para te fazer. Obrigado novamente, viu? Pode responder, por favor, agora. Depois o André, ele organiza a outra.
Yes. Yes. Thank you so much for the question. So, I'm arguing that neo-feudalism is more than a metaphor. It's a concept for understanding what capitalism is doing to itself. It's a tendency within contemporary capitalism, where capitalism's own laws of motion come into contradiction with each other and go in another direction. So instead, for example, instead of leading to improvements in efficiency, which is expected as one of capital's basic laws of motion, they end up not only not improving it, but decreasing it, harming it, destroying it. So the first thing is it's more than a metaphor, I hope. It's about what capitalism is doing to itself. And that expands beyond technology into other fields. I'm particularly interested also in the field of law and how it's part of the privatized jurisprudence and privatized legal solutions. But I won't go into that. So that's how I'm understanding neo-feudalism, is what capitalism is doing to itself. The next point, I would love to hear more about what you're saying about engagement. I found that very, very interesting. It made me think as like, and that there's a shift in the sort of popular / policy / industry language from participation to engagement. And that this shift from participation to engagement brings with it some various connotations, some various possibilities, both descriptive and critical, both opening and limiting. That participation, one might say, was much more supposed to be an activity associated with democratization. And engagement is much more, we can much more easily see it as something that's attaching people to something, rather than treating them as citizens. So participation makes you the supposition as citizens involved in stuff. Engagement means I'm trying to attract you and make you stick to me. I'm trying to find ways to, and I'm wondering if that's your connotation, if that's what you're thinking with that. But I find that this language of engagement very interesting. How is it, like, should the debate go beyond regulation? 100%. I'm fully in agreement. And I think that that essentially all of the big platforms, the search engines, the social networks need to be understood as public utilities. And that they have to be public utilities and then can be function as public utilities with public bodies and regulated in international form, but they should in no way be private property. And what does it take to do that? A revolution of the global working class led by a communist party.
Eu te agradeço. Pedi agora para o André organizar aqui a sequência de perguntas. Contigo, André.
O Adilson Cabral pergunta como essa expectativa por uma internet potencializadora da liberdade é reconfigurada no novo feudalismo, né? Em que as expectativas, de certa forma, erraram com essa expectativa otimista em relação à internet como uma ferramenta libertadora. O Marcolino pergunta como podemos sobreviver a essa exploração. Se a gente precisa lutar como nossos ancestrais lutaram antigamente, né? Contra o feudalismo antigamente. E a Paula pergunta se esses latifundiários da internet é um fenômeno análogo ao cercamento das terras na Europa, com o início do capitalismo, né? E como você vê as questões de gênero e raça em meio a todo esse processo de dominação e exploração nas redes. a pergunta da Paula. São essas. Obrigado.
So let me make sure.
Pode responder, por favor, contigo.
So should I talk or? Okay.
Precisa ler a pergunta? Ah, já leu? Tá bom. Tudo bem, tudo bem. Pode responder agora, por favor. Ah, entendi.
Tá melhor agora?
Tá. Tá. Qual foi a parte que você perguntou? A primeira? Tá, no chat. Tá,
A Paula.
tá.
Ah, eu vou ler as outras. Acho que meu microfone melhorou. Eu botei mais perto aqui de mim.
Tá. Pode responder, então, por favor, a pergunta que ela conseguiu traduzir da Paula. Depois a gente vai formular as outras duas, então, novamente, que parece que ela não conseguiu ouvir bem. Mas a primeira pergunta que foi feita, aí pode responder, por favor. A gente vai organizar aqui a outra para concluir depois.
Okay, so I understood that there's two questions, and that that there's two questions. One has to do with something regarding the history of colonialism and the relation between European feudalism and colonialism, and the other question has to do with gender and race. And so the first question on the colonial part is what's so important about the colonial example is it makes us have to recognize that that feudalism didn't just stop. Like that feudalism has a much more complicated temporality. Like feudalism comes to the Western Hemisphere and sets up a whole chain of relationships and property relations, and obviously relations that are extractive, exploitative, and genocide, that is then driving the other kinds of capital development. And so the first thing is like the colonial experience is, I think, inseparable from feudalism, and that matters. And one of the there's a really interesting piece on the Sahel, right? This is this kind of northern Sahara part of Africa, where the author is saying, like, look, contemporary economic and political relations in the Sahel are feudal, right? They are reenacting a set of feudal relations that were already inscribed in the colonial experience. And so the attention to the colonial example helps us see that feudalism is not just this European thing, it's a set of relations that are exploitative, they're exploitative and fragmentary across a broad array. So I fully agree with the colonial point. On the gender and race point, what's so interesting, and this was the part I brought in from Marx and service sector work, is a number of the other people who write about techno-feudalism right now are really focused simply on the technological features of Amazon. And what I argue is that that's one-sided, and you have to recognize how the networked economy is dependent on and produces the service sector. The array of services from so-called informal work to the broadening, like the only growing economic sectors across the world are home healthcare aides and restaurant workers. But these are really these sorts of jobs are heavily gendered and heavily raced, and they're raced because of the conditions of unequal development and colonialism, and they're gendered because of the kind of general structure of the way that women's labor has been underwaged, and because of its role in the that it's not value producing in the Marxist sense. But this expansion of a service economy as part of neo-feudalism, like neo-feudalism is not just the lords, it's also the serfs, the folks who are doing all of the work to make these small wealthy people able to live. So the gender and race part is inextricable from it. So the neo-feudalism that I'm describing, it's a global phenomenon. And it's one where the inequalities of race and gender that we know are amplified and intensified. And one last, but I think, wait, no, I'll stop there. I think that was it. But if you need more follow-up, that's I can take more follow-up on that.
Agora está com o microfone desligado, André. Tentar.
Sim, liguei.
Confirma se está ouvindo, por favor, a querida tradutora, se está ouvindo bem ele, para a gente confirmar, para ele fazer a pergunta aí para a gente concluir.
Posso falar? Está me escutando bem? Como a expectativa de uma internet, o Adilson fez a pergunta, como a expectativa de uma internet potencializadora da liberdade se transformou em uma reconfiguradora do feudalismo, que desconsideraram as expectativas mais... tá bom. Como a expectativa de uma internet potencializadora da liberdade se transformou em uma reconfiguradora do feudalismo, o que desconsideraram as expectativas mais otimistas de pesquisadores animados com o potencial interativo da internet e a força das redes.
Com essa, a gente fecha, tá bem? Querida camarada Jodi Dean.
So I actually don't think that people need to be more enthusiastic about the internet. If I've understood the question correctly, I not at all. I think that was part of the sort of ideological drug that people took in the 90s and early 2000s, thinking that there was a technological fix to political problems and a technological set of shortcuts that the internet could provide. And so, so that's the first thing. I mean, the internet lost its ability to be a forum for freedom when it became a forum for markets, when it became a forum and an instrument for capitalism and increase and the intensification of exploitation, when it became primarily about finance and not about democracy. So we don't need more enthusiasm for the internet. We need more enthusiasm for social equality and the development of political will. And the more there's focus on that, and so the internet is the internet's the problem, is part of the problem. I mean, I'm not, by saying it's part of the problem, it doesn't mean like I think we should eliminate it. Like at this point, folks are very dependent on it, but it's not the vehicle for democracy. Like someone like Andrew Feinberg, I don't know, he's a Canadian communications theorist, and he still really emphasizes the connection between the internet and democracy. Hart and Negri still very much associate networked digital communications with possibilities for freedom, possibilities for the expansion of, creative biopolitical, the creative biopower of the multitude, or whatever their language is. And I think that those views are mistaken, that the way that capitalism operates through communication now makes it very, very clear that when we're using these media, we are reproducing for capital, and we're basically forging the chains that hold us down. We might still have to use them, but we can do other things about it. We can do other things. Like, basically, we have to organize politically, and that means or it means meeting face to face and going in the streets and getting people outside and tackling the problems and recognizing long-term forms of political organizing, not the momentary energy of things that happen on the internet. Right? So it's just a really different orientation to the internet as a tool, rather than the internet as a kind of space of freedom. I think that's really been proven to be not true. That it's really not. Let me use one other example. I want to think also in terms of like the land and colonies question. I mean, if we say that part of feudalism, whether or not it was European feudalism or the feudalism of the colonizer, particularly in Latin America, that operated through the monopoly of holding onto land, having other people work it, but saying that there was title to it and control over it. Today, we could say that a similar logic holds for intellectual property. And so what happens for the majority of economies in the world is the way that trade laws have been designed is they're blocked from the kind of intellectual property that the United States claims to own, or some other big countries. And then they would have to develop it on their own or pay for it. And if they pay for it, then they get caught more and more into debtor extractive relations, or they pay service fees. So the monopoly hold of intellectual property puts the majority of countries in the world into kind of vassal relations of having to pay for things that they need for very basic purposes. Say something like drug prices would be one example, but technology, and I'm thinking in part about the US and China's real disagreements around intellectual property laws and patent laws. But the way that global trade laws were instituted is it very much hurt the ability of countries to access things that they didn't have intellectual property on, and it let the imperialist powers control the terms of what would count as intellectual property and how intellectual property would be protected. So it's not land, but the relationship is feudal.
Maravilha. Muitíssimo obrigado, Jodi Dean, pela sua excelente apresentação, né, pela forma aí gentil como aceitou o nosso convite. É bom demais te ouvir falar. Acho que a sua contribuição é muito importante para o debate no campo da comunicação, né, que por vezes está um tanto distante, né, de uma perspectiva crítica com relação aos fenômenos da comunicação na contemporaneidade, né? Então, acho que, como dizia o bom Marx, que eu estou vendo aí a imagem no fundo, né, precisamos muito fazer a crítica da crítica, né? Então, isso é um processo contínuo, né, de reflexão e também de construção, né, coletiva, e o trabalho intelectual cada vez mais também aí, né, explorado. A gente sabe que segue sendo, né, fundamental para a gente realizar essa crítica e conseguir, né, pensar e construir uma outra realidade. E tenho certeza que muitos de nós aqui não perdemos essa possibilidade do nosso horizonte. Então, muito obrigado. A gente fecha com a sua palestra, então, os nossos encontros dos 10 anos do nosso programa de pós-graduação em mídia e cotidiano em 2023. A gente vai ter um último encontro iniciando o próximo ano, em março, né? Uma palestra que era para ter acontecido em outubro. e espero em algum momento poder trazer a Jodi Dean aqui pessoalmente também, né, para conhecer a nossa UF aqui em Niterói, né, no Rio de Janeiro. Em breve teremos esse encontro aí presencial, assim espero. E obrigado, valeu, gente, todo mundo aí que acompanhou, tá? Em breve estamos juntos de novo. Valeu. Thank you, Jodi Dean. See you. I'll send to you my papers about engagement. Maybe it will be a interesting talking between us in another time.
So thank you very much, Pablo, for inviting me, and for everyone for all of the translation and the tech support. There were some challenges, but I think we overcame them.
All right. See you. Good night.
Good night. Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you.